Good morning and welcome to Live at the Legislature, where every week we sit down with members of the House of Representatives to talk about issues, concerns, and legislation moving through the halls of the state capitol. With us this morning is Representative Chris Lee. He represents District 51, God's Country, Kailua, and Waimanalo. He is in his first year as the chair of the powerful Judiciary Committee, but this is not his first rodeo. For the past 6 years, he has chaired the Energy and Environmental Protection Committee and has passed through cutting-edge legislation in the area of energy sustainability. More importantly, Representative Lee this month was selected as the Legislator of the Month by an anti-cruelty to animals group, and I think we have a photo of Chris and that award. And the dog in the photo, more importantly, is my dog, Ace Wilson of Kailua. Thank you. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning.
It's good to be here. Who doesn't love animals?
I know. Well, that's right. And Kailua is going to be having a dog park shortly.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks to you. Thank you very much.
Well, we've been working on that for some time.
Good. But listen, I wanted to talk about your work on the Judiciary Committee this year. Your committee passed out an aggressive package on governance reform, taking on issues like election reform, addressing money in politics, and fighting public corruption. Why'd you do it?
You know, this is something that I think everybody's paying attention to. Forget the other independent issues of traffic and healthcare and everything else. All of our biggest issues in Hawaii depend on whom we elect to do the job and what outcomes they move forward with. And the biggest thing we know in Hawaii is that we don't have good voter turnout. We don't have participation as much as we used to. And so one of the things we really wanted to do is figure out how can we bring people back into the democratic process, back into lawmaking, back into coming up with solutions for all our biggest issues. And so we really tried to focus on engaging people, fixing money in politics, making it easier for people to vote, and ultimately getting them engaged in the civic process so that we all have a say.
Those are all, those are really good things to be working on. But some of the issues that you've taken on in a couple of the bills are some pretty tough bills. I mean, addressing money in politics, that's always been something that we needed to take care of, fighting public corruption. Not everybody would agree with that. I don't know why, but there are some people who might not agree with that.
No, I think part of the democracy is getting everybody into the conversation. We might not all agree at the end of the day, but as long as people feel like they have a chance to participate, I think they have trust in the process and the outcomes. I think that's what's most important and been lacking here. Because when people get iced out, I think they're frustrated and they stop participating. And that's a big loss for everyone. So even though we're not gonna have 100% consensus on every issue, I think we're trying to make sure that everybody has a voice at the table. And that's what's so critical. And of all the bills we're passing this year, and I was just talking with a couple reporters about this the other day. If we pass even a handful of these, it's going to be the biggest set of elections and democratic reforms that we've seen in perhaps a generation here in Hawaii. And I think especially now at a time when our next generation, when millennial voters are really starting to look for answers to some of the big problems that they face here in Hawaii, it's time to get them to the table. And that's really what we're trying to do.
So let's talk a little bit specifically about some of these bills in the area of campaign finance reform or taking the money out of politics. What are some of the bills that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, one, there are a number, but the biggest one I think is trying to give new candidates, new people getting into politics for the first time, the ability to run a meaningful campaign and taking money out of the process so that campaigns aren't won based upon how much someone spends, but rather the merits of the ideas being debated. And so one of the bills we just passed would start a meaningful, robust public financing campaign that would allow any candidate to have a pot of money to use to run for office, to get their message out. And then we can let the merits of the ideas compete against one another, not necessarily just the amounts of money going into those races.
This is not, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is not the first time we've tried to pass a bill like this.
No, we've had a couple programs. In fact, on the Big Island, for 3 years running, there were, or 3 elections running, there was a public financing pilot project, which by all accounts went extremely well, and it was at the county level. So the bill that we're doing builds on that progress. and create statewide at the county level this option for candidates to run and take money out of the process as much as possible.
Something you mentioned about the millennials. This year in the House, there are 10 new representatives. And they are fairly, well, they vary in ages, from 34, I think, being the youngest, going up to somebody in their 60s, but who's very young at heart. Do you think the change in the makeup of this year's House of Representatives might give you a better chance at pushing through some of these bills?
I think yeah, and it's not just that we have a lot of new people elected, and there's some great legislators that I think are diving into the process head first. But more than that, I think the momentum that they brought in was built on momentum out in the public. And I think with their constituency starting to get engaged in politics, electing new leaders, I think we see that across the board in every district. So I think for us, it's an opportunity to do more that might not have been possible in the past. And I really expect something meaningful to come out of this, whether it's a bill or a new law or a coalition to do even bigger things in the coming years.
Okay, great. We've got about a minute 50 left, and I wanted to take that time to talk about, we saw what happened in New Zealand just a few days ago, and I want to talk about some of the gun control pieces of legislation that are moving forward in this legislative session.
Yeah, you know, gun violence prevention is one of the things that I think has been tugging at all our hearts as we see these tragedies unfold. New Zealand's the most recent one, but there have been many around the country, and certainly even here in Hawaii. One of the things we want to do is identify, for those people who have especially mentally challenging mental health issues, who have made threats against others, who are known to law enforcement as gun owners and present an immediate threat, to be able to identify those folks and let law enforcement take action before we have a tragedy. You know, even the Xerox shooting here in Hawaii back in the 90s, when 7 people were killed. That guy was identified by law enforcement as having many firearms, was identified for making threats and as having mental health issues, and it was an immediate threat. But there was no law in place that allowed law enforcement to remove his guns temporarily until a time when he was safe for everyone again.
Right.
So we want to move forward, I think, with a law that would allow that to happen. There's already a number of other states that have done it, and it's saved countless lives in situations where you disarm a person who's an immediate threat or terror threat to others. I think it's something that, especially now, I hope moves forward.
Great. Well, Representative Lee, thank you for joining us this morning. A lot of interesting bills that we're moving over to the Senate in the areas of governance, and we are looking forward to the Senate taking action on that package of aggressive, very good bills. Thank you for joining us for Live at the Legislature, and we will see you next week. Aloha.
Do you know your legislators? Visit capital.hawaii.gov and enter your street name to find detailed information about your representatives and senators. From your district number to the committees and current bills your legislators have introduced, this is an easy way to stay up to date with what is happening in your community. If you're looking for detailed information concerning Hawaii State Senate and House hearings, please visit olelo.org/gov-archives. Videos are arranged by date, with the most recent at the top of the list. You can also search the on-demand media library by typing keywords into the search box.
Are you looking for an easy way to get involved in the legislative process? Stop by the Public Access Room located in room 401 at the Hawaii State Capitol. The Public Access Room provides citizens of Hawaii's facilities, services, and equipment to enhance their ability to participate in the legislative process.
Aloha and welcome to Live at the Legislature, where each week during the legislative session we give you a chance to hear directly from your state senators about what's going on here at the Capitol. Homelessness continues to challenge Hawaii's communities. One of the most difficult aspects of dealing with Hawaii's homeless population is appropriate treatment for the mentally ill living on our streets. Joining us today to talk about legislative initiatives that could mark a significant change in evaluating and treating this challenging population is Senator Carl Rhodes, who represents the 13th District, which includes Dowsett Highlands, Pu'unui, Nu'uanu, Pacific Heights, Pa'oa, Punch Bowl, Palama, Liliha, Iwalei, Chinatown, and downtown. Thank you, Senator, for being here. That's a long list, a big area. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I think it's clear to anyone who's been paying attention that the homeless population deals with a variety of challenges. And mental illness seems to be one of the hardest to address.
It is because, as most of us are familiar with, either from working downtown or just from our own neighborhoods, you see people who, even as someone who's not a medical doctor, your guess is that they're not in their right mind. And unfortunately, many of the homeless are mentally ill, and some of them seriously mentally ill. And it does pose a big problem because most of them don't realize that they're even sick at all. And so it's not like if you broke your leg or something, you know there's something wrong because it hurts, and you go in and you get it fixed. Even if you don't have insurance, you'll end up at the emergency room. With the seriously mentally ill, they don't have any recognition, or if they're really far gone, they have no recognition that they're sick at all. And so they tend to refuse treatment. In fact, I encountered a woman once who, we asked her if everything was okay, and she said, yeah, everything's fine. And, well, do you want any help? And she's like, no, I don't need any help. Everything's fine, just leave me alone. Well, she had been lying in the same spot on a sidewalk on Smith Street in Chinatown for about 3 months, urinating and defecating on herself in the street, but she was convinced that everything was fine. So we're trying to address that. When I was first elected to office a number of years ago, I promised myself I would work on problems even if they were virtually impossible to solve. And I have to say this is one of the ones that has been very challenging to make a dent in. My predecessor, Susie Chun Oakland, in 2013 passed a bill called the Assisted Community Treatment Act. And we had very high hopes for it. I was judiciary chair in the House at the time. And we had hoped that, well, basically what assisted community treatment does is says a psychiatrist can go out and diagnose somebody, and if they have a serious mental illness, and you have just about anybody, any interested party, which can be just about anybody, can go to family court and ask that they have that the judge order them to do a medical program, which can include taking drugs. And some of the drugs, some of the prescriptions they have these days are very, very effective with certain kinds of serious mental illness. But we've had a few successes, and we've gotten a few people off the streets because of it, but not anything close to what we had hoped for. And there's still probably, I can think of in my own neighborhood, I live in Chinatown, I can think in my own neighborhood probably 50 people who would benefit from some kind of a medical program. But the choke point so far has been that we don't have enough lawyers to take the cases into petition, because the seriously mentally ill, they don't have lawyers. Often they're estranged from their families can't help, or their families can't afford to pay for the lawyer. So one of the bills, I've introduced several bills this session to try to streamline the process for ACT, assisted community treatment, and one of them is to make it so that the Attorney General's office will be the one who brings these petitions in family court to try to get more people into this ACT program and to get them the treatment they need.
And who would initiate those petitions?
Well, as I mentioned, it's an interested party, which is just about anybody. Mm-hmm. So conceivably you could have somebody, if someone was living in front of sleeping in your doorstep at your business, the business owner could file a petition on their behalf. It could be family, it could be the government, it could be a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. Just about anybody is able to bring a petition.
And what would happen once the petition was filed?
Well, then you have to go to family court, and then a judge, there's a list of about 6 or 7 hoops you have to jump through before you can take away this person's liberty interest, basically. When we make medical decisions for incapacitated people, legally incapacitated people all the time, for children, your parents, they get to tell you have to take your vaccine, or you have to go to the doctor. For people with dementia or forms of old conditions brought on by old age, we will make medical decisions for them. This is a way to make medical decisions for another group of people who are incapacitated. Having said that, they're adults. They do have if they have decisional capacity and they want to say no, our Constitution protects that. And so there's been a pretty major hurdle in just trying to differentiate. There's a lot of protections in the bill to be sure that we don't medicate people that we shouldn't be medicating, but there's been a lot of reluctance to, when someone's actively saying, no, I don't want treatment, to make them take it. But like I said, part of the mental illness is that you don't realize that you have a mental illness. So I think there's good examples of other situations where we make the decisions for other people if they are unable to for some reason. And I think we need to get to the point with the seriously mentally ill where once we've jumped through the legal hoops, we should be able to put you on a medical program.
And within these bills, there's a slight change in what qualifies.
Yes, we try to streamline it a little bit by making it the standard a little easier. So I think the technical language is right now it's imminently dangerous, and we're hoping to change it to danger to yourself or others, which is a little easier standard to meet.
And you're not talking about institutionalizing these people. They're treated on the street, or they're given treatment, but not in an inpatient.
That's the hope. I mean, if you do something really bad as a mentally ill person, you do end up in the state hospital. But we're trying to cut people off at the pass before they do something really bad. Most of the mentally ill are no more prone to criminal activity than anybody else. Most of them just want to be left alone and leave me on my street corner and just leave me alone. But occasionally, unfortunately, we have they've murdered people.
Right.
And there was one fairly recently up near the Y on Poly Highway where a person who had just been sent into Queens for what they call a mental health 1, which is just a form number, but they'd been evaluated and released, and he killed somebody a little while later. There was a case on Kauai several years ago where there was actually a petition to involuntarily commit him, and the judge threw it out, and the next day he killed somebody and he was shot dead by police. So unfortunately, in the minority of cases, every once in a while, it's rare, but they're not in this world at this point, and they're answering to other voices, not from this planet.
Okay, well, thanks for being here. We're going to keep an eye on these. They're moving through. They're all in the House now in Finance. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thanks to Olelo for making this time available, and we'll see you next time live at the Legislature.
Do you know your legislators? Visit capital.hawaii.gov and enter your street name to find detailed information about your representatives and senators. From your district number to the committees and current bills your legislators have introduced, this is an easy way to stay up to date with what is happening in your community. If you're looking for detailed information concerning Hawaii State Senate and House hearings, please visit olelo.org/gov-archives. Videos are arranged by date, with the most recent at the top of the list. You can also search the on-demand media library by typing keywords into the search box.
Are you looking for an easy way to get involved in the legislative process? Stop by the Public Access Room located in room 401 at the Hawaii State Capitol. The Public Access Room provides citizens of Hawaii's facilities, services, and equipment to enhance their ability to participate in the legislative process.
Good morning and welcome to the Legislative Minority segment of Live at the Legislature. My name is Ka'eo Kealoha Lindsay from the Office of Representative Ward. Joining us today is my boss, Representative Gene Ward, the Minority Leader from Hawaii Kai, representing District 17. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be here again.
Today is going to be another hot topic that affects you, and I think the caucus is focusing on specifically this year, is the decriminalization of marijuana or cannabis. So last Friday they just had a hearing in which it passed out and made a couple of amendments, and wanted to get your thoughts on that. The first was the fine was lowered from $200 for possessing 3 grams to $30. So first off, what are your thoughts?
Well, it shows what I said is inevitably the case. We're teeing it up for recreational marijuana. If it's a $200 fine, it's actually a fine. If it's $30, it's a tap on the wrist, which means that decrim is basically going to morph. And now the Senate probably is pushing that, given what you said in the committee report, from a decrim to a legalization, recreational marijuana, which I think Representative Marcus Oshiro said, you pass medical marijuana and you've started the slippery slope from 3 to 5 years to recreational marijuana. So we're seemingly on that same path.
And to carry on to that point, which is sort of the slow creep towards legalization. In the committee report, it says, your committees find that 10 states and DC have legalized the recreational use of marijuana, and there are others considering it. They find that the states that have legalized have avoided criminalization of thousands of people, reduced opioid overdose deaths and opioid disorders, lowered the number of arrests for driving under the influence of alcohol and other drugs. And they find also that recent polling indicates broad public support in Hawaii for that. So the purpose of the bill is to decriminalize, but in the committee report, it references specifically sort of the benefits of legalizing recreational use, and then in the bill it sets up a task force.
Let me give the contra argument to that, the lack of benefits. In fact, let me make an observation at about 30,000 feet. This is kind of a macro about what's going on in our society, and I'm borrowing it from a Scottish professor that wrote it years and years ago. He basically said this: democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidate who promises the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, or in this case, drug policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. So the point is, as we become beholden, and democracy is good because it's self-correcting, but if you go to the extreme of giving everybody everything they want rather than what's better for the society, he goes on and says this: the average age of the world's greatest civilization, including ours, has in history been about 200 years. We're at about 242 years in the US experience since 1776. During those 200 years, nations always progress through the following sequence. First, bondage to spiritual faith. You know, the Pilgrims, we have suppression of religion, and then they have spiritual faith. From spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, and from liberty to abundance, and from abundance to complacency. This is where we are in America. We're at abundance to complacency. And then from complacency, we go to apathy, and from apathy to dependence, from dependence back to bondage. My concern is that not just the decrim, but it's the creeping nanny states. You're not going to have a plate lunch with styrofoam. There's no straws. We're dictating restaurant menus. We're legalizing infanticide, sanctuary states, and incentivizing, hey, you don't have to work. Remember, I'm the old Peace Corps volunteer. They said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Now the theme is, ask what the government can give you. My point is, we're at complacency with our abundance. And this thing about sapping the vitality of our youth through decriminalization of marijuana is just the wrong thing to do. I mean, for those who are thinking that this is good for society, I think it's missing, again, the macro 30,000 feet picture.
Transitioning to another sort of broad level.
Yes, let's get away from the
future of Hawaii.
The sky is not falling, it's just cracking a little bit.
And so you're of the opinion that Hawaii is not taking advantage of its strategic
We're underachieving.
Resources.
We
Okay.
are underachieving. Any state that does anything economically, and one of the things we haven't done in this session is revitalize our economy. We are short. We are missing things like, we can be the Hollywood of the Pacific, but yet we've got a group of people who want to take away the tax credit rather than increasing it. We could literally take over Hollywood. Second thing, we could be the Geneva of the Pacific. The Geneva of the Pacific, bring Kim Jong-un and Trump here to do peacekeeping through the East-West Center or the Asia-Pacific Security Studies Center. We have a great elite diplomatic institution. And thirdly, we could be the sports arena of the Pacific because everybody loves to come to Hawaii and we can compete in all the games, the races, and the cups that exist in the world. But what have we done? Well, we play around and we do management things. We don't look at the big picture at 30,000 square feet. So I'm looking for a little bit more economic revitalization because we get a lot of people who are just barely making it or leaving Hawaii. And we've got to look at those people who sit on the sidelines. Every one of these, Geneva of the Pacific, the sports arena of the Pacific, the Hollywood of the Pacific, are high-paying jobs. And this is not even to mention the Space Center of the Pacific, of which we have the proposal to do a moon base on the Big Island, and we're sitting on our hands and not promoting it. We should be doing these kinds of things, and it's not rocket science, even though that's about rockets going to the moon.
So is it just misguided funding, misprioritizing?
A lack of
certain
priorities.
things?
I think it's a lack of priorities. We get caught up in what's going at the grassroots micro level, and we miss the macro. That's why this session this morning, I want to say, let's go up to 30,000 square feet, colleagues in the legislature, Senate, and House, and let's look at economic revitalization, not just Airbnb and not just taxing the hotels more, but let's look about how our strategic advantages are not being taken advantages, and we're underachieving in what we can do for the people of Hawaii, particularly for their wages.
Last thing, we've got about a minute left. A lot of folks are going to be off work tomorrow for Kuhio Day.
Yes. You know, to make a holiday, you got to do something significant. It's Kuhio Day, and the significant thing he did, he put out a vision for the revitalization of the Native Hawaiians. Unfortunately, after 100 years, the 203,000 acres that were set aside with the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act now has only 9,700 homesteads. And sad to say, we're celebrating, with shame, 27,000 Native Hawaiians on the wait list. So tomorrow's a day to reflect. Tomorrow's a day to remember that Kuhio was a great man to do things for the Hawaiians, of which, because of federal and state lethargy, we have not been able to realize his vision, but we get a day off to remember it at least.
Representative Ward, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for your time. Thank you again to the viewers at home, and thank you to Alelo for this segment. We will see you next week.